Hello friends, this video on metals and non-metals part 6 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So now we have discussed about the physical properties of metals. We saw that metals are malleable, ductile, sonorous, with high density, good conductors of heat and electricity. So now let us talk about non-metals. So first we will start with the definition of non-metals. So these are those substances which are electronegative in nature, just the opposite of metals. So here they do not have a tendency to lose electrons, rather they want to gain electrons. So whenever it is metals, so you can say that metals are like they believe in giving, so they release electrons, whereas non-metals, they are the takers, they want to take electrons, so they will gain electrons. So examples of non-metals are carbon, sulfur, iodine, oxygen, hydrogen. Now if you see, most of the non-metals, they are either solids or gases. However, there are exceptions to non-metals which are liquid, for example bromine. So bromine is one such non-metal which is liquid. So in non-metals, what happens is, inside the atom, inside that substance, you have same number of electrons and protons. But in this case, they want to get additional electrons. So additional electron comes in, and therefore overall the substance becomes electronegative in nature because there are more negatively charged particles. So here if you see, now since it has taken additional electrons, so it is taking additional negative charge. So obviously overall charge will become negative, and that is why they are electronegative in nature. So these are non-metals. So I have already explained you what does it mean about to take electrons or to release electrons. Now the question is, why do we study non-metals? So where do we use them? Now again, the uses of non-metals are also huge. We actually cannot survive without them. So if you think of non-metals, if you think of the gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, so you see that living organisms survive due to the presence of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And oxygen and carbon dioxide, these are all non-metals. Carbon dioxide is made up of carbon and oxygen. So carbon is also a non-metal, oxygen is also a non-metal. You look at the plants. Plants take in carbon dioxide during the process of photosynthesis and they give out oxygen. Now, without these two gases, plants can't survive, and this oxygen again is taken in by the animals, including we human beings, and we give out carbon dioxide. So these non-metals help us to survive. The survival of life depends on the existence of these non-metals. Not only that, if you look at the rockets, the combustion of fuel needs oxygen. So oxygen again is a non-metal. You look at the composition of air. Air contains 78% of nitrogen. It contains 21% of oxygen. So nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, argon, all these non-metals together form the air around us. So not only this, if you see these gases like nitrogen and oxygen, carbon dioxide, they not only form the atmosphere, nitrogen is also very, very important for the growth and development of plants. Apart from that, we also have fuels which are excellent sources of energy. For example, coal. So what is coal? Coal is made up of carbon. And what is carbon? Carbon is of course a non-metal. So coal is again an excellent fuel, excellent source of energy, and we have already studied in our previous lesson that there are so many different uses of coal. Again, if you talk about diamond, it is again made up of carbon. It is, in fact, it is one form of carbon, and diamond is used for making a lot of jewelries. Graphite, which is present in the batteries or the pencil leads, so that also contains carbon, which is again a non-metal. The neon lights which you see on in the shops or in the discs or even in the streets, so these neon lights are also made up of neon, which is again a non-metal. In fact, there are non-metals like hydrogen and helium which are present inside balloons, the gas balloons, which just go, when you leave it, it just goes up high in the air. So it contains hydrogen, helium. So they are also non-metals. You would have also seen that in the swimming pools. Now, the swimming pools contain so much of water. So there are chances that infection or the water gets dirty because there are so many organisms, insects and everything inside the water. So therefore, you would have seen that chlorine is applied in swimming pools for keeping away infection. So what is chlorine? Chlorine is again a non-metal. So all these chlorine, neon, hydrogen, helium, carbon, so these are all examples of non-metals. Not only that, in fact, non-metals are also used in a lot of antiseptics. For example, iodine. Yes, the same iodine which is present in salt, the iodized salt. So iodine is also useful in preparation of a lot of antiseptics, and that's how we see that even non-metals are also used in our day-to-day life. In fact, forget about day-to-day life. We are surviving due to the presence of these non-metals like oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Life forms would not exist without these. So it is equally important to talk and to discuss about non-metals as well. So again, in a very similar way here also, we will start with the history of non-metals. Well, non-metals were the only non-metal which was discovered during the prehistoric time was carbon. Now that is quite surprising, right? You remember when we talked about the history of metals, we saw that gold was the first one to be discovered in 6000 BC. But gold was not the only one. There were many other metals like copper, iron, which were discovered during the BCs. So during the prehistoric time, a lot of metals got discovered. But compared to that, only carbon was the only non-metal which was discovered during the BCs. And that too, carbon was discovered in the form of coal. Now, one reason behind this is when you talk about metals, they are all solids, so you can actually see them. So discovering them is easier when compared to these non-metals which are mostly in the gaseous form. So you really cannot just imagine that okay, carbon is present here, oxygen is present here, or nitrogen is present here, because they are in gaseous form. So it is little difficult to find them or to prove their existence. But however, over a period of time, gradually other non-metals were also discovered. The next one to be discovered was phosphorus, which was during the 13th century. So there was a long gap between the discovery of carbon and phosphorus. Now when phosphorus was discovered, it was mostly used in explosives. Why it was used in explosives? Because of its reactive nature. So we will talk about all that. Next was oxygen, which was in 1774. So you see, oxygen is something which is so much important, right? Like oxygen is present in our atmosphere. The air is composed of almost 21% of oxygen. In fact, the entire earth has almost 50% oxygen, because when you talk about the oceans, oceans contain what? Water. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. So oxygen being such an important element on earth, it was discovered very recently, because 1774 is not not long ago. So it was discovered quite recently. Then gradually all other non-metals were discovered, like nitrogen, chlorine, sulfur, hydrogen, and so on. So that's how the non-metals were gradually discovered. Another interesting thing, if you compare metals with non-metals, is that if you look at the number of metals, they are more when compared to the number of non-metals. So in non-metals, you have comparatively lesser number of elements when compared to the number of metals. So quantity wise, so that wise, the number of metals and number of non-metals, metals win. But when you look at the amount of metals or amount of non-metals which are found on earth, then of course non-metals win, because the quantity of non-metals is definitely more on the earth. You talk about oxygen, you talk about nitrogen, you talk about carbon, they are all present in huge amount on the earth. Oceans have hydrogen, oxygen, atmosphere have nitrogen, oxygen, carbon. So that ways the existence or the quantity of non-metals is more on the earth when compared to metals. But when you look at the elements, how many of them are metals and how many of them are non-metals, you see that there are more metals than non-metals. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more educational videos with a better experience. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for latest updates. Thank you once again.